Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the class. This is SSW 421, Environmental Social Work. So let's see how much we can cover for the time that we have. Um, I've just talked to the class rep. Your class rep, please check on her. She's not feeling well after we are done with the class. Okay, she's a very hardworking young lady. So please take some time and you can call her or see her physically. Okay, we pray for her to recover quickly. Okay, let's carry on and see what we can cover. Remember, this is a very short semester and you all understand why. So we are doing a crash program. So we are trying to cover as much content as possible in almost half the time we would have used under normal circumstances. All right. So for this particular session, okay, we're going to try and cover more than one usual session. So for this particular session, which is for week 6, we're going to look at environmental livelihoods, green jobs, and sustainable development. You can always comment in the chat. Please post your questions or your comments in the chat, and then I'll be able to respond. And also, I will encourage other members to also respond in the meantime at the same time. Okay, so you're welcome. All right, so we are building up from where we began at the beginning of the semester. And like in social work, like I always say, we look at things in terms of relationships, okay? How people or things relate with each other. And it helps to bring about an easier understanding of concepts. So, for this particular session, we are looking at environmental livelihoods, and therefore we have to also look at environmental distraction. Okay, so I want to bring in the issue of relationships. Now, you know very well one of the 6 values of social work is human relationships. Of course, when we expand that, we then come into general relationships, how things relate and how people relate. So, I'll pose a question to you here. If environmental distraction causes poverty, okay, and environmental distraction in this case is, us mistreating the environment, our relationship with the environment it, it becomes hostile, violent, counterproductive. So we abuse the environment, we litter our environment, we litter the water bodies, we pour poison in them that affects the living organisms in there. We overconsume, okay, certain products within the environment that are not able to keep up with our rate of consumption. Okay, we cut down trees unnecessarily. We burn down forests. Okay, there are so many examples that we can give. So we are distracting, causing distraction to the environment, and so we are being abusive to the environment. We are not showing the environment respect. And so I've asked you, if we do the opposite, okay, we are kind to the environment, okay, just like in any relationship, we clean the environment, we consume at a reasonable rate from the environment, okay, we repair what we have damaged. Can the environment give us back? Okay. Can the environment be good to us as opposed to crashing down? And we know as social workers that when we ill treat whatever entity that we are working with or that we are relating with, then we are likely to not get positivity from it. We then devalue it, we depress it, we oppress it, we suppress it. Okay. So, in the long term, even after it has tried to sustain itself, it will break down and it won't be able to give us back. But now, after realizing our mistake in this relationship with the environment, we should be able to give it back the love that it deserves, the care that it deserves, if we actually want to benefit from it. And for us as social workers, the environment is our client. We are extremely concerned about the environment because it feeds our clients. But primarily, our major clients are the vulnerable and have always been children, those who have physical or mental challenges, the elderly, the poverty stricken, and so many different kinds of vulnerable groups. And and so we're talking about, we go back to talking about resources. Okay, to be able to support the vulnerable groups, we need resources like to put children in school, to give them adequate health care, to give them food, just basically all these populations that we've talked about. If you just talk about the most basic need, they all need to feed. And this needs resources. Okay, this boils down to the need for resources. Now, these they're like food, for example, will come from the natural environment. So we have this symbiosis whereby looking after the natural environment will be able to give us this food for us to be able to look after, to feed that child. Okay. And this needs resources anyway, to be able to plow the land, give back to the land, let's say organically using organic manure, pay for the labor involved in that, weed. Okay, all these things are resource involving. And so what we are saying is we need the resources to be able to still look after the vulnerable population, and not just the vulnerable population, the general population. And one of the what holds or feeds these resources is the natural environment. And so we realize that we have to give it back, or give it for it to give to us, because we need finance to look after the vulnerable population. So as we are looking after the environment, okay, being our client, we are also being realistic and looking for the means, okay, the financial means to be able to cater for the vulnerable groups in our society. And so we ask the question, or I ask you the question, can environmental protection create jobs or create opportunities? Okay. So we want to look at some examples of where this question is answered. Okay. And remember, what I'm emphasizing on is that at the end of the day, we will still have to feed the vulnerable. And let's look at children as an example. We'll still have to feed these children. We will still have to clothe them. We'll still have to attend to their medical needs and any other need. And these will need finance. So from this same environment would like to be able to get livelihoods for the caretakers of these children. All right. So let's look at ways in which the environment can be able to address the issue of poverty, or can be able to create jobs or opportunities that would be beneficial to the population, okay, or to society. So I put for you some examples here. We have a youth group planting trees for carbon credit projects. Now we have organizations or industries, let's talk of industries around the world that have to produce. Reality of life is that production has to go on despite what we've discussed in previous classes. In the previous class, we talked about climate change and its effect on the environment and therefore on life, on society. And we gave very close examples in the last class, because in our capital city, the flooding that has been occurring was happening around the time that we're having that discussion. So the realities are so clear, okay? But at the same time, these societies need to run. These industries need to produce. The same children will need to put on clothing, okay? Now, there are instances where these industries surely must avoid populating, and that is the direction to go. But there are instances where the gases that we talked about, like the carbon and other poisonous gases, just have to be released into the atmosphere. And one way of addressing this is the same industry or another, let's say through corporate social responsibility, another arm of that industry or society can take part in the absorption of that carbon. It can be a collaboration, let's say with the industry, as they are focused on production, and they can support an NGO, a CBO, community projects to be able to do things like planting trees, okay, to absorb the excess carbon from the atmosphere, the excess carbon dioxide, sorry, from the atmosphere. All right. Now, these will give the industry carbon credits, okay? And so the example I put here is a youth group, okay? An assumption that the industry is supporting a youth group to plant trees, okay? Because they are focused on their core business, to plant trees so that they can earn their carbon credits through this youth group. So this youth group will be able to gain from the protection of the environment, okay, as they proceed to implement the project. So we have an increase. Therefore, in that particular community, I know it sounds counterproductive because already the industry keeps pumping in more poisonous gases into the atmosphere, right? But now we are talking of addressing the matter, being solution based, not just letting the relationship run down. Back to the analogy of the relationship between the environment and us, and how we treat each other. So where the wrongs have been made, we must quickly um, address them. Okay, if you go back to your theory, then like using the broken windows theory, okay, correct, fix as soon as possible. So from this, we are seeing that in that particular community, we're already addressing the issue of poverty by creating opportunities for these youth. They will be perhaps getting funding, stipend, scholarships, various items that they can use to empower themselves or uplift their lives. Again, I put an example here of women selling solar lanterns in rural communities. Okay, so already we can see a shift from using, we are going green, okay? So we are using less expensive and friendlier, environmentally friendlier ways of energy, um, lighting for this particular case. So these women will be benefiting from the selling. The solar lanterns are also environmentally friendly, and the source of energy is free, other than what is invested in buying the particular equipment, okay, by the community. So in terms of, let's say, paying for electricity, or already the bills of those particular members of the community will go down. Then I put again another example of farmers practicing climate smart agriculture. Now, agriculture is very, very important. It produces the most basic need for society. And society has changed. Like, in African society, um, things like chicken was not consumed on a daily basis. Um, Chapati, as an example, was not consumed on a daily basis, but now you'll find chapati in almost every street corner in any town. Okay. Yeah. So we put we push agriculture so hard that they have to produce at such a high rate because of the unreasonable consumption that we have. And of course, we can see the results of that in our society. Our bodies are not able to even process all these things that we're consuming at the rate that it needs to be healthy. Okay. So farmers are under pressure to produce enough wheat, for example, to be able to give us those chapatis that we want to consume daily. Uh, Chicken has to grow so fast. Like a traditional chicken, an African traditional chicken usually takes honestly about a whole year to grow, and it's usually not that big in size. And no wonder such a food is not consumed so regularly because of the effort that is needed for it, to mature. Okay. But now that people want these foods and others on their tables almost at every meal, then there's a lot of pressure to produce them. And so a lot goes into cutting the corners to make sure that you have what you want on the table. Okay. And this can be detrimental um, to the land, to the environment. But now like we said, we are correcting the wrongs. And so when farmers practice climate smart agriculture, like organic farming, for example, which of course is slower but of course the food is healthier, they can be supported. Okay, they can be supported to do this. Okay, and so gain from this financially. And there are also those who value quality, okay, quality food, like organically produced food, which is more expensive because of what it takes to produce them. And so they'll pay more for these products, and the farmers will also be able to benefit from that. Okay. So we're still continuing to look at how the environment can create opportunities. So another example I put here is youth recycling plastic waste into building materials. Okay, so collecting all the waste that is in the environment and actually putting it to use, as opposed to it landing in our rivers, lakes, streams, um, oceans, and so on and so forth. Okay, so the encouragement here is that as we work, we are social workers, as we work with the environment, we are at the same time able to improve the livelihoods of the vulnerable populations and society in general. Okay. And so we are able to address the main issue that affects the vulnerable, which is poverty. So all these forms of generating livelihoods are examples of green livelihoods, environmentally friendly livelihoods, environmentally friendly ways of making money. Okay, so environmental social work is not only about protecting nature, it is also about protecting the persons who live within and around this natural environment. Okay, so creating sustainable livelihoods, okay, and therefore protecting people and the environment. So let's look at these environmental livelihoods. Environmental livelihoods are income generating activities that rely on the sustainable use and protection. Okay, so you use and you protect, you use and you protect. Okay, like in any valuable relationship, in any relationship that you expect to succeed, okay, you gain from it and you protect it. You can't just keep abusing it, all right? Um, okay, so these livelihoods allow the communities to earn income, like we've already shared, at the same time, protect the ecosystems, okay, reduce environmental degradation, so repair, ensure that degradation does not continue, and then build resilience in the climate. Okay, um, um, sorry, not build resilience in the climate, but build resilience in the people. Okay, in the population against climate change. So build climate resilience. Okay. Um, so these particular initiatives that we would want to employ are particularly important in rural and vulnerable communities, like we've already said, because these are the areas that are most affected by poverty. So let's look at some of the examples of these livelihoods. Okay. Okay. We have agroforestry. Okay. So instead of fighting with the forest, is to collaborate with the forest to produce the food instead of cutting down trees so that we can have more land. Okay. Um, Being destructive to the forest, um, harassing the forest, attacking the forest, okay, abusing the forest, just so that we can be selfish and have more land to grow our crops to feed ourselves. We understand that we need to feed the population. We find ways of working with the forest. And interestingly, the forest produces a lot of food. Okay. A lot of food which in a lot of instances does not need any human being to be involved in its production. Things like mushrooms, honey, herbs, traditional vegetables, and so on and so forth. There's so many examples. Okay. Or cultivating within the forest without causing destruction. Okay, so it's a win-win situation. All right, then we have fishing as a livelihood. Again, like we said, people now want to eat fish, very healthy food, but consumption has gone up, of course, because also population has gone up. We do understand that. Okay, and so the demand for the fish or for fish goes up at a very fast rate, or has gone up at a very fast rate, but we need to fish sustainably. The sizes of fish, for example, that are harvested from the water bodies, okay, we need to harvest mature fish and leave the smaller fish to take their natural time to grow. Okay, so there are so many ways that we can sustainably fish, but sustainable fishing is one of the examples of environmental livelihoods that people can get from the environment, from the natural environment, like pond fishing. Okay, not necessarily fishing in the natural water bodies. Okay, ecotourism. Okay, the environmentally friendly practices that we are engaged in, the protection of the environment, can attract tourists, people who want to see how we are applying that. Even just wildlife, protection of wildlife provides an opportunity for ecotourism. Okay, like the traditional Maasai culture of living together with the wildlife, and then conserving that, attracting tourists, and of course gaining income for the entire nation. Recycling businesses, okay, recycling plastic bottles, recycling tires of vehicles, and all forms of recycling, paper, and all forms of recycling. Okay, so that we don't just heap this unnecessary waste somewhere. We use it. Some of these bottles are even used to put up buildings. There's so much that can be done. Okay. Organic farming, avoiding the use of fertilizer, which depletes the, the resources in the soil. Um, okay. And then some of this fertilizer, when there's water runoff, the fertilizer, the poisons find themselves in the water bodies that some other members of the population even use to drink, okay, or to carry out other domestic activities, okay. So, organic farming using manure from the farms as opposed to fertilizer, okay, and this will give the farmers, those particular farmers, the opportunity to be able to sell organic foods, okay? And these organic foods are very popular, particularly with those who have discovered their value. You know, they don't have the poisons that other food have, okay, and so on and so forth. So they'll be able to get to cut a niche. They cut a niche for that particular kind of food and make more money from them. Of course, it's more time consuming and energy consuming, but worthwhile in the end and more beneficial to the environment. Okay. Renewable energy services like solar, wind power, hydroelectricity. Okay. So green energy. Okay. And there's so many other examples that you can add. So these livelihoods combine an economic development, which is very key, right? Remember, the economic base determines the superstructure, okay, with environmental protection. Remember, again, in the previous class, we talked about sustainability involving the economic aspects, the environmental aspects, and the social aspects. So, in this case, in terms of livelihoods, once we have arrested the economic aspects, so we are gaining, these populations are gaining economically from their activities, the environment is protected, the social fiber and the social circumstances generally will be lifted up. So we live a more sustainable life in that particular society. Okay. So let's look at green jobs. Okay, what are these green jobs? Jobs of the future. We have seen we can no longer run away from the matters of climate change and global warming. We have seen it for ourselves, okay? I like to go back to the example of the floods in the CBD of Nairobi, okay? And there are so many other examples that we've talked about. For example, just around town here, we had a blackout for the last 24 hours. I hope the issue has been addressed now. And because of environmental factors, okay, some trees fell onto some power lines, uh, supposedly, okay, somewhere in Kakamega, and that has affected the supply of electricity. Okay, so there, we are living the reality of the impact of global warming and climate change, and so we realize clearly that it is a problem that we have to address. Okay, so let's look at green jobs. Okay, where are these opportunities that we now want to give the vulnerable groups that we protect? So, according to ILO, green jobs are jobs that contribute to preserving or restoring environmental quality. Okay, so either we keep them at the proper level where they are, or where there's been damage, we restore. These green jobs reduce environmental harm while creating employment opportunities. Okay, so let's look at the characteristics of some of these green jobs. So as we're going through this, it means you're already able to, or you're beginning to identify uh, how you can link the vulnerable population to these green jobs, okay, within the community. So, green jobs usually reduce carbon emissions. Okay, they improve energy efficiency, so they use little energy. They protect ecosystems, and they promote sustainable production. For example, solar energy technicians, okay? So perhaps having or introducing, okay, or encouraging a project to train youth in to be solar energy technicians is one of the ways that you can we can increase, okay, the capacity when it comes to those who have the skills and the techniques to be able to have these green jobs. Okay, so focusing on uh, solar energy, okay, and being able to have the skills to actually put up the plants and the technology involved in solar energy, realizing that we cannot run away from the challenges in the environment. And so the future is green. Okay, so we are already preparing our groups, our vulnerable groups, when they consult and they want to, like the youth want to know what possibly could they study. These green jobs have a future. Okay, so we are already securing their future by linking them to the capacity to be able to acquire the skills to work in these green jobs. Okay, waste recycling entrepreneurs, of course, again, this is the future. We have seen at our doorsteps the impact of mistreating the environment. So we now know that we have to work to protect this environment. So the kind of future that we'll have, the people who will be relevant in the future, or the businesses that will be relevant in the future, are the ones that will be protecting the environment. So the jobs that are among the jobs that will be relevant are the green jobs. Okay, climate adaptation specialists, environmental educators, including those who are training in the field, sustainable agriculture consultants, wildlife conservation officers, and others. Okay, so we're encouraging uh, our clientele in the rural areas, okay, um, and those who are vulnerable to to acquire the skills to be able to um, carry out these green jobs or be entrepreneurs of green jobs. Okay, so let's look at this green economy in Kenya and see what we have done so far. In terms of our country, we have embraced this concept of the green economy. Our national leadership is very passionate about it. A green economy is one that promotes economic growth, it protects the environment, and improves social equity. So, in the end, it leads to a sustainable life for the country. And in Kenya, we have the Green Economy Strategy and Implementation Plan, and this promotes renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, climate smart industries, and green innovation. You know very well we have been very successful at getting rid of the use of plastic paper bags. So when we travel to sometimes in to other locations, we'll still find these paper bags in use, and so you can see the effort that has been made to actually get rid of those plastic paper bags. Of course, here and there are things that must be wrapped in a way that they'll not be damaged by moisture. So there are various steps that still need to be worked on, but that is a huge step for the entire nation. Okay, let's look at environmental livelihood opportunities. Again, when we look at this, we're looking at opportunities that we can use to connect our vulnerable groups, okay, our clients, which will also help them to nurture the environment, to have a good relationship with the environment. So the first is climate smart agriculture. This helps farmers adapt to climate change. For example, crop diversification. Okay, farmers can plant a variety of crops such that if one is affected, they still can be able to be cushioned. It's like insurance by a different kind of crop which may survive the rapid change in climate, okay, in the environment, right? Because the weather patterns have not been as predictable as they were before. So perhaps last year um, there was a heightened bean harvest, okay? And then you find that this particular year that may not be the case, but previously it was possible to predict that. But if we plant other than that particular bean, maybe different kinds of beans, or we plant different kinds of legumes or different kinds of crops, okay, so that uh, we have some insurance, we insure some crops against others, okay. The use of drip irrigation has become very popular, so that with the little water that is there during certain times when there's scarcity of water, we can still be able to harvest enough food for the population. Planting drought-resistant crops like cassava and others, okay. Agroforestry, which we already talked about, working well, responsibly with the forest to produce food. Okay. So, for example, farmers combining maize, beans, cassava, and fruit trees to reduce risk. So, the benefits of this would be increased food security, reduced soil degradation, and improved household income. Again, we can talk about agroforestry. We can encourage the community and discuss with them to be involved in agroforestry, especially in the communities that live around the natural forests, okay, like those around Kakamega Forest, for example. Um, Campus, as you know, is naturally part of the forest. So when you're talking about agroforestry here, we are also talking about those of us within our campus. So agroforestry combines trees with farming, and you can see some activities within the campus that are um, farm activities within the campus that are environmentally friendly. We have the stingless bee project within campus and others. All right, there's so many. So examples are fruit trees, okay, within the farms, okay, nitrogen fixing trees, shade trees for crops, okay, and the benefits would be soil fertility improvement, carbon sequestration, firewood supply, okay. For example, in Kenya, farmers planting gravilia trees alongside crops just to provide that shade for the crops, okay. Ecotourism promotes tourism that protects natural ecosystems. For example, wildlife tourism, which the country has heavily gained from. Okay, so protection of the wildlife while benefiting from the wildlife. In this case, we can bring in the issue of community-based natural resource practices. Okay, so part of the resources that are gained from tourism by the national government should come to the local population because they live in symbiosis and in responsible collaboration with the natural environment. And because of them, all of us are able to benefit from their cultural practices that are environmentally friendly. Cultural tourism, okay, the preservation of culture is such a worthwhile effort. And we have realized this more and more, especially after or during the COVID-19 epidemic, okay, where we realize the importance, particularly realize the importance of, like our natural hubs. You remember, like when medication was not, there were no flights, we're not able to get medication from the places we normally get them from. And the same persons also had their population to look after, and they also decided to prioritize their population. So, they also had to cater for their people. They couldn't just send medication around the world at the expense of their people. In terms of quantity, of course they did, but in terms of quantity, that had to go down. So we then went back to our roots, okay, the hubs, and people got a lot of positive results from the use of traditional herbs and traditional medicine. And that is just an aspect of culture. There are so many aspects of culture, and there are so many cultural centers within the country that can be harnessed. All this is part of the respect for the environment. And this will draw in people who are interested to learn, people who, you know, are interested to just see how differently things can be done. Okay. So cultural tourism, community conservancies, okay, again linked to cultural tourism, like the Nabongo Mumia Center. Okay, and just people visit from around the world and they just see such conservancies, right? And these bring resources to the community as well as protecting the environment, because alternatively somebody would have decided to bring that down and put up a shopping center, okay, which is not as fine as quality in terms of the returns to not just the environment, but to the people in terms of the social returns, okay, in society. So, for example, the Maasai community conservancies generate income through wildlife conservation tourism. Okay, so the benefits of these, of course, would be job creation, wildlife protection, community development, of course. Then we have waste recycling enterprises, okay, another sector for development. So this particularly would be more relevant in the urban centers. So urban waste, a lot of waste is produced. Of course, production of waste is just part of living, okay? Human beings, animals, nature produces waste because, we have to process. But, the levels of waste and the inability for them to be degradable has been the challenge. So there's a lot of plastic which needs to be recycled. So these are opportunities. Again, with organic waste, which is becoming more and more popular, more and more farmers would like to use organic waste. So there are people who can compost organic waste, okay, because it takes time to, let the waste, break down, okay, is when they can be sold out, okay, depending on the type of waste, whether it is chicken manure or pig manure or from cows or any other animal. And then waste to energy initiatives. Okay, something which is considered a waste but can be used as energy, for example, like black soldier fly, which can be used immediately to feed animals in the farm. So, for example, youth groups converting plastic waste into paving blocks. Okay, wonderful. And the benefits would be reduced pollution, creation of employment, and cleanliness in the urban centers or urban areas. Of course, we say cleanliness is next to godliness. When the environment is clean, okay, again, we find that there's even impact on the economic livelihoods, okay, where the environment is messy, then you find that the economic circumstances of those around there is also degraded. So the environment will also always reflect, it will always treat us the way we are treating it, it will always, I mean, you dump that there, well, those around there are going to start losing money, okay, or losing opportunities. You clean the place, after a while, opportunities spring up, okay. A clean space will attract resources, okay, and a dirty space will chase away the resources, okay. All right, then we have renewable energy livelihoods. So renewable energy industries, of course, are expanding rapidly because we have already seen that that is the future. So, for example, we have solar panel installation. These are the jobs, the green jobs, and the jobs of the future. Solar lantern distribution, we are seeing that more and more. Biogas systems for those who have animals in the farm. Okay, instead of purchasing, you know, gas commercially. Clean cook stoves, electric ones. Okay, for example, right? So, for example, we have women groups distributing clean cook stoves in rural communities. So they'll benefit through income generation. We'll have reduced deforestation because we have less reliance on firewood. And then there'll be reduced indoor air pollution. You know, most traditional African structures or houses have minimal ventilation in the kitchen. The kitchen house is usually outside. I'm talking about a cultural house, okay, a very traditional house or home. Okay, we now have fewer and fewer of them, but a very traditional home would have a kitchen. The kitchen would be outside. It's just a house, okay, outside or away from the main house. But when you went to most of those houses, they didn't even have windows, and the women who cooked in them went through a lot. And these are some of the reasons why a lot of those women died young, and they died of lung complications. Okay, just the ability, to contain the smoke. Okay, and no cooking in the cultural sense is part of their responsibility. So they have to cook for, it's like they're cooking continuously, not really continuously, but you get my point. Huh? They cook often, so the exposure to the smoke is was high. Okay, so now we are distributing, we are replacing that with clean cook stoves. Okay, and so that will be in reduced indoor air population. Okay, the same like what the Jiko would do. All right, if you replace your Jiko with gas. Okay, and a lot of times they realize that it costs less to use the gas than the Jiko. All right. Okay, the role of social workers. What is your role now? Okay, so that when you go out there, you're soon graduating. You're going to go out there and start to work in these communities, in the organizations. All right. First is to identify sustainable livelihood opportunities. For example, training farmers on climate smart agriculture. Okay, you're already working for the future. Okay. Two, you'll be facilitating community training. You'll be sensitizing. Okay. You'll be organizing environmental education, agricultural training, entrepreneurship workshops. I know you're like, okay, now Doc is talking about agriculture a lot. Okay. And you're social workers, but a social worker is a jack of all trades, right? In terms of all the specializations that you've covered in social work, including industrial social work, medical social work, okay, because we work with people, okay, and people are what hold society. Yes. And agriculture, like we've said, is the backbone of a lot of economies and produces the most basic need, which is food. So we cannot run away from it, okay? Again, you'll be linking communities to funding. You have these skills in proposal writing. You have your networks with funders and with the organizations. So, for example, you link communities to microfinance, to NGO grants, to various government programs, to county government programs, okay, national and county programs, okay, among others. You'll strengthen community organizations, you'll support cooperatives, you'll support farmer groups, you'll support women groups, the chamas, you'll support youth groups, okay? You'll promote inclusive development, okay? You'll ensure that women participate, men participate, because gender is not just about women. Children participate. Children's voices are normally left out. The elderly participate. Okay, the physically and the mentally challenged and all other groups participate. So inclusion. You'll ensure that youth benefit. Okay, because sometimes youth can be left out when now the benefits are being shared because their voice may not be represented. You'll ensure that vulnerable groups are included, like we've already said. Okay. And then another one of your roles will be sustainable development. Like we said before, sustainable development is development that meets the present needs. Okay. We can have what we want now, not really want what we need. Okay. Want versus need. Remember, want is what has degraded our relationship with the environment. We want. But what do we need? We should just take what we need. Okay. So development that meets present needs, what we need now. Okay, our needs should be met because we are also important, but without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. We should ensure that we leave a system behind that any anybody in any future generation will still be able to meet their own need or their own needs. Okay. Um, this concept was popularized by the Brundtland Commission in 1987. Um, this was among the first agreements that member bodies of the UN had in relationship to climate change and global warming, with the realization that our environments are quickly changing and our populations are rising to a level that our environment is not able to produce sufficiently for the wants of the population. Okay. Again, we've already talked about the three pillars of sustainable development: economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, and social sustainability. So at any given time, like we shared before, where any of these is off, then you find that there's a shake, just like in any relationship in life, or you know, any existence. Okay, where you expect people to dwell. Okay, uh, to dwell positively. If we don't have a balance of these three, then we are bound to not have, I don't want to use the word peace or tranquility. Can we for now say tranquil? Okay. There's bound to be a lot of chaos and shakeup. So we have to have enough in terms of economics. And in economics, we're talking about needs, okay? Not wants, okay, without being greedy. So let's just talk about what people need, they have. Okay. The resources that they have can produce what they can give them what they need. And then the environment, the natural environment in which they are in, okay, is healthy. It can give back. It is treated well. It is clean. Okay. And socially also, they they respect. There's respect for the social rules within the society or within that setup. People treat each other well, responsibly, with respect. Okay, so if any of that starts to shake, then you find that they shake the others. Okay, so you want to always uphold the three. Let's look at sustainable development goals. Okay, which ones are linked to environmental social work? So these will guide you in your practice. SDG 1 is the goal to ensure that we don't have poverty. There's no poverty in the world. SDG 2, zero hunger, that everybody has enough to eat. SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. Okay, economics. SDG 13, climate action, so the environmental aspects. SDG 15, life on land, again, the environmental aspect. So you're going to be contributing to achieving these goals as an environmental social worker. Now, what are the challenges that you will experience when you're trying to implement these environmental livelihoods. Okay, anything that is positive, of course, will have its challenges. So you might experience limited access to funding. Many communities lack capital to start green businesses. Okay, and that's where we mentioned your networking skills to be able to link them to funders. Lack of skills. Okay, people are quickly embracing this uh, area of resource mobilization. Okay, and so the issue of skills is, people need upskilling. Like a farmer would need some upskilling when it comes to climate smart farming. Okay, in terms of renewable energy technologies like solar. I mean, solar could be installed in a farm, but because it's a new technology, understanding that would be important. Um, Environmental entrepreneurship. It's a business, running the environment as a business. Okay, working with the environment as a business. Okay, so the community will need training in this particular aspect. You'll also face the issue of market barriers. Right now, green products may struggle to access markets because of their cost. For example, organic farmers will be competing with non-organic foods that are maybe half the price. Okay, you'll find like a variance in the cost of eggs, for example. Some are very cheap and some are more expensive. And so when people are hard up on money, they'll just prefer to purchase the cheaper food. Okay, policy barriers. We are still working on enhancing policies. They do exist. Um, Sometimes the implementation of these policies may be a challenge, as much as they exist, because sometimes people are waiting for emergencies to be able to actually understand um, what damage to the environment can do. So, but more and more, um, we are getting to understand that. Okay. So let me just check if you have any questions. Remember to put any questions that you have on the chat. All right. Or any comments. So I think we can carry on. All right. So then what we're going to go through next is what we'll go through physically when we meet in class. This is the most important part. Like I always share with you, I prefer that we practice what we are talking about within the class setup, so that when you go to the field, you actually understand what is going on and you can take initiative. Okay. So, in this first task, we want to come up with a business plan. So, this is the Green Livelihood Business Plan. We are doing this so that we can already be able to assist people or members of the community to implement uh, the ideas that they will have. Okay. So the task here is each group, you'll work in your groups, designs a green livelihood project suitable for a Kenyan community. For example, organic vegetable farming, solar lantern distribution, plastic recycling enterprise, tree nursery business, fish farming. Okay. The project plan must include the following. Okay. The problem that is being addressed. Okay. The target community, the community that you're targeting. You need to be specific about that. The environmental benefits of the project, the income potential, what is it that they're going to gain from the project, and the implementation strategy. So what you'll deliver is a 4-page green livelihood project proposal. All right, very simple. And then I've put the marking rubric there. So in the next class, we'll have these presentations. So after all this is what you need to have learned. or be able to demonstrate green entrepreneurship planning. So you should be able to do this for organizations and communities, environmental livelihood design, sustainable development understanding for yourself and for communities, community economic empowerment strategies, which we have talked about at length. Okay, so you need to be aware of them. And again, a recap: the places that this knowledge will help you work in: environmental NGOs, sustainable development programs, climate finance initiatives, agricultural development organizations, and community conservation projects. Remember, like I shared with you prior, you'll be able to work with NEMA, you'll be able to work with your county government as regards to environmental matters, NGOs, international NGOs like UNEP, that supports environmental initiatives. Okay, so when you see those opportunities, step in or step up to apply for them. Okay, or do a pitch to those organizations, and show your knowledge of being able to work with them, because particularly as a social worker, you are strong in community organization. You have the skills to be able to penetrate communities where other professionals or people from other disciplines may struggle. Okay, so it will be easier for you to implement this project successfully, for that reason and others. Okay, all right. So I want us to move to the next content, which is advocacy. Okay, advocating for your environment, community mobilization, mobilizing the community, and social movement. So this is embedded in the method of social work of social action. So social action as regards to environmental matters. So here I've posed to you: if a factory pollutes a river, if a forest is illegally logged, if mining destroys community land, okay, what can ordinary citizens do? And mining now is so close to this community, because just here in Ikolomani, a lot of gold has been discovered, okay, and is being mined and has been mined even earlier. Okay, so what can ordinary citizens do? Should they remain silent? Should they wait for government action? Should they organize themselves? So throughout history, communities have organized themselves, okay, to defend their environment. All right. Whenever their environment has been attacked, and this process is referred to as environmental advocacy and community mobilization. So just as you advocate and lobby for various vulnerable groups, just as you carry out your community mobilization efforts towards populations in society, we do the same in this case for the environment, right? So, environmental social workers like yourselves will play a major role in helping communities to organize themselves. Um, you'll help them, you'll advocate for them, okay, and influence environmental decisions. Now, community organization or mobilization is traditionally part of your work, including advocacy. And in advocacy, as you're aware, you will work together with policymakers. And policymakers at the county level will be your MCAs, okay? Policymakers at the national level will be your MPs. And remember the importance of networking in social work practice that I always emphasize to you. Like now in your class, you are networks of each other, okay? So take advantage of that now. In the department in which the course is housed, Take advantage of those networks of those who are studying the other disciplines in the school. Take advantage of that. In the entire university, take advantage of that. Look at the resources, look at the variety of the various professions and disciplines. All those are your networks. And beyond, okay, where you have done your attachments in your community, your your family members, your you know neighbors, okay, all these are networks. So you do, again, back to the concept of relationships, you would want to have a healthy relationship with all these possible networks. One of the networks that is going to assist you in advocacy for these in environmental social work are the policymakers that I've mentioned at county level, the MCAs, and at national level, the MPs and others, okay? Because they influence, they have a lot of influence into the making of the policies. Okay, so a lot of times you'll find that, like, let's say you see an MP on TV proposing a policy, for example, they will have gotten um, the information that about the community from professionals like yourselves. Okay, the professionals will have gathered that information and shared with them and shown its relevance. You'll have written a proposal to them, explain the grievances of community members to them, link them to those community members, so that by the time they are actually tabling those matters, they have a lot of reliable information from professionals like yourself. Okay, so let's look at environmental advocacy. So the environment, back to the natural environment being your client, you're advocating for the natural environment. So environmental advocacy are actions taken to influence policies, okay, either a new policy or to review an existing policy based on changes in changes in the environment. Okay, there are also actions taken to influence decisions and practices in order to protect the environment and ensure environmental justice. Remember our topic some time back on environmental justice, okay? That various populations should gain equitably from the natural environment, all right? And just as a reminder, remember, like, waste can be produced by a particular community but dumped in another poorer community. Okay, those are examples of environmental injustices, right? So how the environment will now be affecting the vulnerable population that we're talking about. So advocacy would focus on protecting the natural resources. Because now what have we discovered? That they're actually very rich. They feed us. So we protect them. Defending the rights of the community, promoting sustainable development, which we realize is key to ensure balance. Okay, balance is the word that I've been trying to recall throughout, to ensure balance, okay, in life. When things are balanced, even if they're not perfect, okay, the boat can be able to move. But when the boat is rocking, okay, chances of completing the journey are minimal or less than even if you're going at a slower pace. But that there's serenity, there's calmness, okay? That's the balance that sustainable development gives us. Advocacy also focuses on holding governments and corporations accountable. Okay, governments are responsible for; they are the caretakers of the entire population. Corporations, of course, are the business aspect of these nations, and so they provide jobs, They produce various material that are needed, but again, we have to hold them accountable because they have to practice responsibly. So, in terms of course, as a social worker, when it comes to advocacy lobbying, a lot of social workers will work in civil society. And so, in this sense, we're looking at civil society for the environment, okay? Civil society practice for the environment. So, environmental advocacy ensures that vulnerable communities have a voice in environmental decisions, like in the participation of the development of policies and laws. Let's look at the forms of these of environmental advocacy. Sorry. Okay, so the first one is policy advocacy. So you'll be advocating for the right policies. Okay, so again, this is your work. Okay, you're advocating for policies that protect the environment, among other factors that we have mentioned. So this would involve influencing environmental laws and policies. And like I shared earlier, you'll be working together with the policymakers. Okay. And of course, policymakers are not just those who present policies in parliament. There's an array of stakeholders, including organizations that you will partner with, right? Like human rights organizations push for justice, okay, for social justice. So, for example, advocating stronger laws against illegal logging, lobbying for plastic waste regulations from which we have seen fruit, campaigning for climate action policies. Okay, so in our country, like already shared earlier, plastic carrier bags were banned in 2017 after strong advocacy from environmental groups. Then you'll also be doing community advocacy, advocating for the community. So this is when local communities organize to defend their environmental rights. Now, in your using your participatory skills, of course, you will support the community and not come in as somebody who knows everything, but support them by linking them to various networks because they already know what they want and what they need and how they are affected. But what they would need is linkages to the networks, knowledge where necessary, okay, uh, perhaps about laws, and support, basically to push for the rights that they want attended to. So, for example, communities protesting pollution in their community, like the example I gave of waste being removed from an affluent area and being dumped in a less affluent area. Okay, farmers resisting land grabbing, okay, like forest land and other forms of land. Fisher folk defending access to lakes and rivers because they understand how that overconsumption of the wrong practices are affecting their livelihoods. So, for example, I put an example there because of the platform. Let me not read it, but you can see that. Then you'll also be involved in legal advocacy, environmental litigation. In this case, you'll work with legal practitioners. Okay, you can even be working in a law firm and such organizations. So, environmental litigation, in this case, you'll usually be working with the courts to enforce environmental rights. Our constitution allows citizens to file cases in court if environmental rights are violated. So, for example, you'll be assisting communities to sue polluting industries. Okay, you can still do this as a consultant. You don't have to be employed per se, okay, to be working for a particular organization. In your consultancy, which I always encourage you to do, you can even have this consultancy even if you're employed somewhere. It can be your side hustle, okay? Um, Examples also include environmental groups challenging destructive projects. Let me just check. Yeah, all right. Something here. Okay. Then you can be involved in media advocacy. Okay, see, media is very powerful for raising public awareness about problems, and in this case, you'll use this for environmental problems. For example, investigative journalism on illegal logging. You can work together with journalists, okay, in this investigation because you will be able to help them penetrate the community um, and access vulnerable groups. Okay, you can carry out social media campaigns on climate change. You can do some documentary films exposing environmental destruction. Okay, you can have a press conference. There's so much that you can do. Okay, all right. Okay, so let's move on to community mobilization. Okay, you need to mobilize the community to come together about the particular cause at hand. You remember in your community organization practice, communities need to feel that they own a project. And if they don't feel that ownership, they can even jeopardize that project. Okay? You are aware of this, of course. So, community mobilization, as you know, is a process of organizing communities to take collective action to address shared problems. Some of the problems that affect entire communities when it comes to environmental matters include things like logging, dumping, environmentally and irresponsible practices around development. Okay, so in this case, you'll be helping communities to understand the environmental threats that are affecting them. You know, sometimes these threats take place, but the communities don't understand, like, for example, the linkage to diseases like cancer. Okay. So creating awareness and giving that education, you'll be helping them to develop collective strategies. Okay. Because now we have begun a confrontation or or a war, so to say. So you need to have your weapons ready, and you'll be helping them to demand accountability from the environmentally irresponsible party. So what steps will you follow? Okay, these are the steps you usually use in your community development. Creating awareness. So community need to be aware about the environmental risks. For example, training them about the health impacts of pollution. Leadership development, identifying and empowering community leaders. Remember, at the very, very beginning, you penetrate the community using the leadership, okay? The community leaders. The leaders of that community give you entry, okay? They're the door to the community. Now, in this case, we are talking about leaders of this movement, of the advocacy process, okay? So there are people who community members are more likely to listen to when they call, when you need people to gather and they call the people will attend the meetings, for example. So elders, women leaders, youth representatives, and so on and so forth. Okay, you have them in communities in terms of community organizing. You help them in collective action. Communities work together to address environmental issues. Okay, so they work together for action. So, for example, tree planting campaigns, community cleanup activities, and environmental protests. All right. Again, in community organizing, you'll engage them when it comes to policy because it's through policy that changes can be made. Okay, long-term changes. So in this case, communities will engage government institutions, for example, petitioning county governments, participating in public hearings, engaging environmental regulators, okay? And then environmental social movements, sorry, community and organizing, okay? Now we're moving to environmental social movements, all right? Environmental social movements are organized collective efforts. Sorry, I tripped in my mind a bit. Aimed at protecting the environment. So there have been movements over time to protect the environment. This must, you can imagine how challenging this must have been when the weather was predictable, when there seemed to be no cause of alarm. When leaders like Professor Wangari Maathai were pushing for the protection of the environment, you can imagine the difficulties they had at that time with trying to convince people that mistreating the environment is detrimental to our livelihoods. You see, now it's so much easier to understand because we can actually see for ourselves what the effects of global warming and climate change are. You go to the Lake Victoria, the shores of Lake Victoria, and you can actually see the evidence of the buildings that were roofed with iron that are now flooded with water, where you find birds that are perched on top of those roofs. So you can see how far water has encroached onto land. Okay. The same for, let's say, Lake Naivasha. We can see the floods, the extremities in the levels of the severity of the droughts, the occurrence of disasters like landslides and mudslides that were not a frequent occurrence in the past. Okay, so these movements, those who have held them, those who have championed them, at the time they were championing them, and the challenges they went through, like being arrested and all the challenges they went through, we need to be very appreciative of them because a lot of them did this at a time when it was not so obvious that there's a problem. Okay, I wanted to just make that point. All right, so back to environmental social movements. Okay, so these are organized collective efforts. Okay, people come together aimed at protecting the environment. And they often emerge when communities feel environmental harm is unjust and authorities are not responding adequately. So environmental movements can influence major policy changes, and it's these policies that we use to embed our work. When we have a policy, it is easier to enforce change. It's easier to practice. It is easier to have lawsuits. Okay, so examples of environmental movements: we have the Green Belt movement in our country, founded by Professor Wangari Maathai. Her objectives were on tree planting. Remember, she really helped to safeguard Karura Forest, and we are indebted to her as a country. Okay, so she was also into environmental conservation and women empowerment. What she achieved: millions of trees were planted. She got global recognition for environmental activism, and she received a Nobel Peace Prize in 2004. Of course, there's more than this, okay? But just briefly, we have global climate movements, which include organizations and setups like Fridays for Future, youth climate strikes, and these movements demand stronger action on climate change. Okay. So let's see what we can do as social workers in terms of environmental advocacy. So we'll be helping communities to advocate for environmental justice. One of our major roles will be education, environmental education. So we educate communities about environmental rights, environmental laws, environmental risks, and we make it simple for them to understand. We'll be doing community organizing. So we support communities to form advocacy groups, to develop action plans, and to coordinate campaigns. We'll be engaging with them on policy, so we'll help communities to participate in environmental policy consultations, in county planning meetings, in public hearings. We'll be involved in advocacy training. Advocacy, you need to be organized and to think as one. Like I said, it's like you have started a war. And so, you know, you need to be together. Sometimes you can even be infiltrated, and then the whole advocacy campaign is broken down. Okay. So, communities need training in public speaking, in negotiation, and in advocacy strategies, because you're not going to do this for them. You're empowering them to do this for themselves. You build their capacity. Okay. You'll also help them in coalition building, that is the networks. So you help them build partnership between other communities that have had those challenges and have been successful, with NGOs whose mandate is environmental matters, with various government agencies like NEMA, with researchers who have a lot of information on environmental matters and maybe having latest information that can be shared that will be helpful for their cause. Okay. What are some of the challenges you'll face in environmental advocacy? It's not always easy, so you may face political resistance. Powerful economic interests may resist environmental reforms. For example, mining companies resisting environmental regulations. Okay, you want to get out the minerals as fast as possible. Okay, they may be very powerful. Community fear. Communities may face retaliation from powerful actors, perhaps from what they have observed happening to other communities or themselves in the past. Limited resources. Advocacy campaigns require funding. They require legal expertise. They require media access. All this requires money. Information gaps. Communities may lack access to environmental information. Hence, we refer to researchers. And we help them bridge this gap. Okay, let's look at environmental rights in our country. Our constitution provides strong environmental rights, particularly Article 42 guarantees the right to a clean and healthy environment. So we as citizens can demand environmental protection, we can participate in environmental decision making. Okay, like when public participation is done on policy review. Okay, we can seek legal remedies when environmental rights are violated, like compensation. So this makes environmental advocacy a constitutional right, okay? And the various bodies that we talked about that champion environmental protection in the country. Okay, so let's look at the competency-based activities, which we are going to do in the next class when we meet. So work in your groups. So these are the most important aspects of the content, the ability to apply, okay? So the first, community environmental advocacy campaign. We have a scenario here. A factory is releasing untreated waste into a river used by nearby communities. Your group represents a community environmental advocacy team. So here's a task. Design an environmental advocacy campaign addressing the pollution. Your campaign should include the problem analysis, the community mobilization strategy, the advocacy strategy, the policy engagement plan, and the media engagement strategy. Very, very interesting. The deliverables are a 3-page environmental advocacy strategy. Okay, you give your presentation in class, and I've given my marking guide there. So these are the competencies that after this content, you should be able to demonstrate. Environmental advocacy skills, community mobilization strategies, environmental rights awareness, policy engagement skills, and campaign planning abilities. These are environmental campaign planning abilities. Okay. And from these, you'll be able to work in environmental NGOs, in community development organizations that do some environmental engagement, in policy advocacy groups for the environment, in human rights organizations, and in government environmental agencies. Of course, they don't always have to just be purely environmental. Like we said, the environment looks after the vulnerable groups. And so when you're championing for the vulnerable groups, you will find that you have to bring in environmental issues. There's a point I'm making, and I pray that all of you get it. The future of social work is changing. The future of the world, of course. The future is not now, but the future is now, okay? Whichever way you look at it. The way things will have to work will have to be environmentally responsible. We'll have to live sustainably if we actually want to live. And therefore, we cannot leave out environmental issues into any developmental issues we'll be doing. Just the same way we talk about socioeconomic development, we have always partnered social aspects, developmental aspects in developmental work. We now must talk socio-economic environmentally. And so when we talk about, for example, some of the organizations you'll work in community development organizations, in one of the classes, earlier classes, we already talked about how to do a needs assessment, right? Now, which of course would involve, and we talked about, environmental impact assessment, okay, in a previous class. So in terms of development, any developmental project will need for you to conduct an environmental needs assessment, which you now are able to do. And so you do get that there'll rarely be a time where you're talking about development, community development, championing for the rights of the vulnerable without bringing in environment. Okay, that is just it. All right, so let me just check. All right, I think we're still okay. I want us to end now with this content that is before us, which I have been alluding to: the future of environmental social work and emerging challenges. And then when we meet in class, we will then look at the competency-based activities for the sake of practice. Of course, we're ending with this week 8 because I've concised everything, compounded everything into these weeks because of the length of the semester. You understand the background of the semester that we have had, and we're trying to cover for the lost time that affected us nationally, okay? So, but be assured that all the course content is included in this updated material, okay? So what is the future? It's always important to project and know what is likely to happen so that you run ahead of others, because you're competing as professionals and you're ready for the life of the future and are able to fit in and perform in that time. So here I've asked you, what will the world look like in 2050? Okay. And it might seem like a long way off from now, just like we used to talk about Vision 2030. It seemed like something so far off or far-fetched. But now it's just 4 years from now. Okay. So what do you think the world will look like in 2050? This is what scientists predict when it comes to the environment. Okay, so we are now winding up to prepare you for practice of the future. Okay, that is the importance of this particular content, so that you can practice. When you're called in, you can deliver, right? And you have to learn about what will happen then, now, so that you can be ready or prepared for it. So, scientists predict rising global temperatures. This is not new to you, of course, but you know, uh, continuous rising global temperatures, increasing climate disasters. I believe just yesterday or the day before yesterday, government produced a circular or an alert about a bridge, a major bridge breaking, connecting major towns. So the extremities in the occurrence of these disasters, you know, is heightened now. It is very clear right now. So what they are saying is, even as we advance into 2050, there's still going to be an increase in these climate disasters. So as we are mentioning this, you in your mind, you begin to picture what role you can play in addressing these issues and the effects of these issues on vulnerable groups or on general society. Because at that time, it doesn't even matter who is vulnerable or not, so long as they're within that geographical space. Of course, there are various factors that will um, make a difference, but yeah, generally everybody there is vulnerable. Water scarcity is predicted, climate migration, so people moving because of climate change, resource conflicts, and others. Okay, so these changes will deeply affect human well-being, and so the question is, who will help communities adapt to these environmental challenges? Mm. So, um, I want to put a load on your shoulders and tell you that environmental social workers like yourselves will play a crucial role in addressing these future challenges. But of course, you'll be prepared. So, firstly, let's look at the growing importance of environmental social work, why it's so relevant. And we cannot just look at it as some fancy course title. No, very applicable, very critical, very relevant in society today. So, environmental social work is becoming one of the fastest growing areas of social work globally. Why? Because environmental issues are increasingly connected to poverty, health, migration, conflict, food security, and others. This means that environmental challenges are also social challenges. Okay, that one we are together in the understanding. So, future social workers must therefore integrate environmental protection with community development, with climate adaptation, and with social justice into their practice. Okay, you can't leave any of these behind. Emerging environmental challenges. Okay, in our country, let's look at them. Climate migration. This refers to the movement of people caused by environmental changes such as drought, flooding, or sea level rise. So, what we're saying here, we have seen climate migration happening before, like the flood prone areas. People move away uh, when their environment is attacked by floods, then they move back. But what we're saying is, in the near future, that possibility of moving back may not be there, especially as the water bodies continue to encroach the land. Some time back, there was a documentary. I believe that was in any around one of the water bodies. Uh, there's a woman who was sharing her devastating story of how she took all her investments after retirement to purchase land, like these pieces that are sold off plan, or just land that is sold, and people can come in and build like a gated community or some kind of community where they're together. So uh, those are the properties that those around that area put up, and she took her investment, her resources, and put up her property, knowing that she has retired and this is what she has for her life, and maybe from her pension she will be surviving. And then the water. This was around the lake, one of the lakes in our country. And then the waters, let's call them the waters because of their massiveness, the waters began to encroach. And it would seem like sometimes that, water is moving towards the land, and then at other times it retracts, but then it just kept moving. And it reached a point whereby the water was in the homes, they had to move, and eventually their homes were covered up. So we're talking about a time when you can't actually come back, so you have to migrate. Okay, the persons have to migrate. So, for example, pastoralists moving due to drought, farmers relocating after crop failure, coastal communities displaced by rising sea levels. These are the normal migrations. And as I've listed, climate migration is already occurring. Okay, but it's likely to occur in more places. So our roles in this would include supporting displaced families, mediating conflict. Okay, of course, like we said earlier, uh, where there's an imbalance with economic matters, okay, social matters are disrupted, conflict falls within the social spectrum. And so if the environment is disrupted and the economics are disrupted, yeah, conflict will arise. The rehabilitation of livelihood. These people, where they are relocated, their livelihoods have to be rehabilitated, or if they decide to go back. Okay. Let's look at environmental conflict. This occurs when communities compete over scarce natural resources. Okay, so those who have migrated will be moved somewhere where obviously there are other people. So conflicts will occur over water, because already researchers are telling us that there'll be scarcity of water, grazing land, forest resources, mining areas, okay, and others. For example, in our country, pastoral conflicts occur over pasture and water during droughts. So we can help through conflict resolution, community dialogues, and resource sharing agreements. Okay, urban environmental challenges. So urbanization is creating new environmental problems. Urban centers are not immune to environmental problems, as concrete as they are. So it would seem that their concreteness takes away the natural environment, but they did encroach into some previously very green space or sandy space. Okay. So examples include air pollution, waste management crisis, informal settlements in high-risk zones, and water shortages. For example, rapid expansion of Nairobi informal settlements near polluted rivers and dam sites. Environmental social workers will focus on community health, environmental sanitation, and urban planning advocacy. Okay. And back to the matter of sustainability, we'll realize that when the environment is not catered for well, it can punish economically. Okay. The city should be clean environmentally for it to be economically viable. The city should be clean socially. Okay. The social fiber of how people conduct themselves and treat each other uh, should be upgraded for the city to stand economically. That is the mysterious answer. You can't just focus on the economy. Climate anxiety and mental health. Okay, all these things about climate change, sometimes just Reading them uh, on social media or seeing them affects people's mental health. So many people will experience climate anxiety, fear about the future, trauma after being affected by disasters. Young people are particularly affected because, they're kind of thinking about what future they will have, and what you can do to support them is provide psychological support, community resilience programs, helping communities to be resilient, to be able to manage when disasters strike, provide climate education, and others. Okay. Technology. Let's look at technology and its role in environmental protection. Okay, we are still continuing to unpack the future. So technology is playing an increasing role in environmental protection. Like now you can use drones to find out so much. Examples include satellite monitoring. So we can track deforestation. We don't have to go into the forest physically to do that. We can track illegal mining. We can track land degradation using technology. So this is reminding us to be technologically savvy, and be able to use technology for solutions. Again, in terms of technology, we have mobile environmental reporting. So communities can easily give us reports on the violations, environmental violations occurring in their communities through mobile platforms. They can report on illegal logging, for example. They can send an SMS. They can send a WhatsApp message. They can post on X. There's so much that they can do. Climate information systems. Farmers now receive weather forecasts, early warning alerts, and agricultural advisories. So we can help them to access these technologies and use them. Okay. Let's look at climate finance and environmental funding and how this is affected in the future. So climate action requires financial resources. So in climate finance refers to funding that is provided specifically to support climate mitigation and adaptation programs. So this includes funding for renewable energy projects, reforestation programs, climate smart agriculture, disaster resilience projects, um, and others. And the sources of this funding includes governments, international organizations, development banks, climate funds, and so many others, philanthropists. Okay. Uh, some of these projects are very interesting. Because of this platform, I will not mention the particular one I want to talk about, but there's one particular one that was going around giving a different form of cooking. And they had these something that looked like a kibuyu that you use to fill up the energy that is needed for this gadget, okay, that you'll be using for cooking. Okay. Some of these come also with their challenges. The usability of that product, I remember, was just frustrating. Eventually, they rolled out of the market. I don't see them anymore. You have others that maybe want to gas, something with gas is connected to some technology, for being able to fill it up. But the technology is, it's kind of like being tested. And so you have to keep calling them. And I felt that compromised security issues. So there are challenges, but of course, from the challenges we learn and the systems get better and better. So anyway, how do we help communities access these funds? We actually help them to access funding opportunities. We help them develop project proposals, and we help them manage these projects, okay? Because when the projects are managed well, then they're more likely to, the funder is more likely to support them even in other projects. Okay, we are winding up. Careers, okay, the interesting part. Careers in environmental social work. Okay, the employment opportunities in government agencies, for example, NEMA, in county environmental departments, can work in those. You can work in the various disaster management agencies, in various NGOs, for example, environmental advocacy organizations, in climate adaptation programs, in community development organizations, in international organizations, can work for UN agencies, in international humanitarian organizations. Okay, so humanitarian work following occurrence of disasters, in global environmental programs, in research and academia. You can work as a researcher in environmental matters. You can be a policy analyst. You can teach in various institutions, okay, on environmental matters. In private sector sustainability programs like community social responsibility for industries. You can also be hired to manage environmental compliance for the organization. Like I said, corporate sustainability, climate risk management. Okay. You can also, like I said earlier, just employ yourself and be a consultant and provide for all these organizations various products. Okay. Most importantly is ethics. Okay. Ethics is the most important thing in the practice of social work. It is what sets social workers apart from other practitioners. Okay. It's what will differentiate you from, anybody just helping and caring in the streets. So always uphold the professional ethics. Okay. You do it for yourself, you do it for the organization you work for, you do it for the groups that we serve, the vulnerable groups, because they're relying on you to do the right thing. You do it for the profession, for all of us. When you practice ethically, you're representing all of us, and for so many other reasons. So we must uphold strong ethical principles in our practice. So our ethical responsibilities in terms of the environment include environmental justice, which we have exhausted in a previous class. This is ensuring that environmental harms do not disproportionately affect vulnerable populations. And I gave you the example of dumping waste from affluent areas to less affluent areas, or from affluent nations to less affluent nations. Another ethical responsibility would include intergenerational responsibility, protecting environmental resources for future generations. Community participation, ensuring communities participate in environmental decision making as opposed to being dictated to. So, protecting the autonomy. So, the principle here will be autonomy, the autonomy and the self determination, another principle of self determination, protecting the autonomy and the self determination of communities by ensuring their engagement in participation. Cultural sensitivity, respecting indigenous knowledge systems and traditional environmental practices. And the reason why those systems exist is because they help to maintain the social balance of those societies. Okay. Except when things have changed so much that they're no longer relevant, the communities themselves can also reform them, okay, or do away with them, or we can assist them as regards to that. Our future role or your future role, you'll be acting as advocates. We've talked at length about advocacy, as educators of communities, as researchers, so that we are relying on reliable data. Okay, this is such a critical aspect of life that you need to have reliable information. For example, farmers would really need to know when the rains would start and when they will end and the quantity of that rain. Okay, so the information has to be accurate. Okay, of course, that information will be provided for them by the meteorological department, not by social workers. You'll act as policy influencers. We've talked about that a bit. As community mobilizers, as disaster response specialists. So you'll work closely in climate science, in social policy, in community development, and in human rights. So, final reflection. If your county experiences severe drought or flood disasters, right now it's really floods in the country, or forest destruction or pollution, this is related to what I asked you at the very beginning. What role will you play as a social worker? Environmental social work is not just about protecting nature, it is about protecting human dignity in a changing environment. When floods come, they can really expose a person, you know, even remove all their clothing. Okay. Let us look finally at this final competency-based activity. The environmental social work intervention plan. The task is that in your groups, you design a comprehensive environmental social work intervention plan for a Kenyan community of your choice. Possible themes include, but you can use any other: climate adaptation in Turkana, flood resilience in Budalangi, waste management in Nairobi, deforestation control in the Mau forest. Projects must include environmental problem analysis, vulnerable population identification, intervention strategy, policy and advocacy components, and sustainability strategy. You can see that we keep building from week to week, and the more you practice these competency-based activities, the more you repeat what the projects must include, and so at the end, it becomes second nature. So what will you deliver? A 5-page environmental social work intervention proposal. And this is what you'll present in class, this proposal. And I put there my marking rubric. Okay, so at the end of this entire material, you should be able to analyze environmental justice issues, to assess climate change impacts, to design environmental livelihood programs, to conduct disaster response planning, to advocate for environmental rights, and to develop sustainable community interventions. And you should be able to work in environmental NGOs, in climate change programs, in disaster management agencies, in government environmental departments, in international development organizations, and others. Okay, so that is it. Um, that is it. I look forward to seeing some of you working in this field in the near future. I recently met a former student of who graduated in 2017. She's working for an organization I won't mention, but it's an international organization. And she's actually practicing industrial social work. And so she works for a US company, but she's based in Kenya. And her work starts at 4 p.m. because of the time difference. And she's well looked after. Okay, so you can see that we've prepared you to be able to compete internationally and to be able to serve the nation adequately. So with environmental social work, there are also plenty of opportunities. for you to be able to practice. So widen your scope, spread your net so that if you can move out of traditional social work practice, if you're able to and you'd like to, if you're passionate about it, you can do so. Okay? So I wish you a good day, and please check on the class rep. She was unwell. For those who have not been able to log on, please share the link with them so that they're able to go through the material. When we meet next, we are going to practically go through the competency-based activities so that we can practice and test the ability to apply. Okay? Cheers. Bye.